Welcome to the Low Tox Life podcast.
The tens of millions of wild animals that are proliferating, that are destroying native habitat, that are competing with natives and farmed species for water, for forage, impacting farmers' daily lives in terms of fencing and infrastructure.
Hello, I'm Alex, your host, founder of Low Tox Life, and today is a doozy of a show on the food system in a way you might not have thought about it before. We often think about the food system as access, affordability, whole foods, learning to cook from scratch more, farmers markets, supporting farmers, and all of this is very important. But when it comes to public health, food policy, environment policy, and economic policy, today we are looking at an example of addressing an invasive species and how we can actually create success across all of those. We're looking at invasive deer, specifically in Australia, but also through a couple of global examples that have had amazing success. My guest is Tara Medina. She's the founder of Discovered Wild Foods, and we actually spoke years ago to kind of wake people up to the idea of wild foods. But today we are looking at what is happening, how bad the problem is, who it's affecting, everyone from farmers and their fences or devastation to plant-based crops. And for me, this really highlights that all eaters matter and all eaters can eat how you want. However, we need to understand how we can best make a positive impact when we are considering doing better, and things like cruelty-free that get bandied about without a full understanding of what we need to do to produce the food we're producing along the way. So I really hope all types of eaters listen to this. Tara breaks down the impact and the opportunity beautifully. I'm going to shoot to a few of our wonderful show partners who help you with your low tox swaps, and then let's dive in. If a healthy home is your priority right now, then Oz Climate, our major podcast partner, without whom we could not put this show on every week, has got you covered with 10% off for Aussies. Code Low Tox Life. Dehumidifying is a particular passion of mine because it helps us prevent moisture, excess humidity, and of course, therefore, mold in our indoor environments. Of course, if you ever have a leak or a flood, contact a mold technician or a building biologist. But for everyday living, you would be surprised the impact that good dehumidification can make in your indoor environment. I've done a ton of reels on this to help you know how long, what size of unit, how many units, different floor plans. Everything's there on my Instagram at lowtoxlife, and you'll see all the white background tiles are part of a humidity literacy series. I hope it helps you. Head to ozclimate.com.au. They have heating and cooling solutions, amazing dehumidifiers, and their Winix air purifier range. Tara, hey, how are you?
Hi, Alex. I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm good. I can't believe we have to have this conversation again, but we do. You were on the show a few years ago,
Yes.
and you were raising awareness basically on something that you were really very much still trying to get off the ground, which was not just the concept of eating more wild foods from wild animals, but the impact of certain animals' wildness on our landscapes, and we talked specifically about deer. So where has this journey over the last 3 or 4 years taken you?
Yeah, look, it's been a wild ride to say the least. I'll try
Fantastic.
not I'll
Yeah.
try not to do too many of those jokes, but um, we obviously started focusing quite exclusively on fine dining restaurants and chefs
Mm,
because chefs were early adopters of getting behind what we were doing.
yeah.
They're always interested in trying new flavors. They're always interested in provenance, and getting things in kind of their most raw and unadulterated form. So we were really lucky that a few renowned chefs saw what we were doing and believed in it. And we got to have a lot of fun seeing dishes go on the plate in restaurants like Cumulus and Co. and Iceberg in Sydney. And, it was a real sort of privileged moment to see that happen. But we knew we were never going to move the needle on the scale of the problem just showing up on a plate in fine dining.
Mm.
So our mission has always been to make wild protein as widely available as possible, but it sounds easier than it is in practice, right?
Yeah.
Because even if we have enough wild protein available in Australia to pop up at a Woolworths or a Coles, there's a lot that goes into establishing that supply chain,
Mm.
meeting all of the QA, investing ahead of the curve. And we're a really left field business for a lot of investors. So we've really had every struggle you can imagine, from finding the capital to scaling up our manufacturing to recruiting butchers into the business, separate to the challenges we have around wild. Like in Australia, butchery itself is really a dying trade,
Mm.
with a lot of sort of industrialization in the abattoir chain. So over the last few years, we've tried to pull every lever available to us to go more mainstream. And one of those was partnering with the lovely Jo Barrett, quite a renowned Australian chef who I think has been on your podcast
She sure
before.
has. Yeah, great
And
chat.
she's amazing.
She's an amazing
So
human. Yeah.
my co-founder, Billy Staunton, actually met her abalone diving in Flinders Island.
Of course, as you
And
do.
he didn't know who she was. And then he came back and he said, "Oh, I met this amazing woman and we should follow her up." And he said her name, and I'm like, "Do you know who that is?" But
Awesome.
we partnered with Jo and another chef that she's worked with at length, Lou Daly, another chef, Mark LeBroy, formerly Three Blue Ducks, and created a wild game pastry business called Wild Pie.
Hmm.
So that's been running for just over a year and has been really amazing at demystifying the protein for a lot of people, because we get so many questions of like, how do I cook with it, how do I this and that, and there's so many barriers to trying it. But once people understand that it can appear in a format as you know comfortable as a pie, and it's just another pie,
Yeah. I
really
think,
breaks down some walls.
yeah, it makes me think of Jamie Oliver's amazing distillation of food psychology and getting kids to experiment on different flavors and veggies and things when we were doing all the food revolution stuff. And it was always in the context of sell it as something familiar with something new. Never
Yes,
just go all in on new, because, as you pointed out, that's kind of where we started. That works in fine dining because chefs get it. But average Joes trying to get through their week, pick up kids, half an hour to get dinner going. It's like, oh God, and now this meat I've A, never heard of, B, don't know what to do with, don't know how it's going to act, don't know how long it takes to cook if it's in a casserole compared to, say, beef. Like, there's a
totally.
lot of barriers there, and a meat pie is like the gateway drug for wild food. It's like, this I understand. This is comforting, yummy, familiar
Correct.
flavor, familiar product, but it
Yeah.
has this new thing in it.
Exactly. So Wild Pie really targeted three of the most conventional, well-known Australian formats: the pie, the sausage roll, and the dim sim, and made them all wild protein. And they have resonated. They have really hit the mark. We get amazing feedback about them. And that kind of was a huge part of just changing our thought process on how we should approach the average Australian diner, because we always sold mainly wholesale and to chefs, but um, we always wanted to go into retail. And I think we didn't fully appreciate how much format matters, as you're saying.
Massively.
Um,
Yeah.
and we always thought the story would sell the product because we believe in the story so much. And the story is very real in terms of how much impact people can have. Like most efforts in conservation or environmentalism, like ask people to give something up,
Mm.
and we're just asking people to try something new, like
Mm.
that's additive. You
But
don't
the
have to give
genius
anything
thing
up.
is, it's not, it's something new that you already love. That's
Mm,
the clever part psychologically because it's more like try an interesting take, like a small variation, because it's still a red
mm,
meat, and a lot of people, that's not a big
exactly.
jump. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even that is a really common question. People who love meat and are keen to try it, they say, well, what recipes should I use? And the simplest answer is it's just another red meat, like the same
Mm.
way that you'd use beef or lamb. But, the scale of the problem and how addressable it is, like, really shouldn't be underestimated. Like
Yeah.
right now, the average Australian eats maybe 30 grams, like per capita, of venison per year. But
Okay.
if,
So
yeah,
So let's actually talk about the problem before we dive
sure,
into how that change of increasing that wild protein and what that benefit would be to the landscape. Because I think anyone who missed the first show, I just want to make sure we do a bit of catch up here on what exactly is the problem and why do we need to be trying wild proteins?
for sure. So to start at the start,
Yeah.
Australia is one of the strangest modern blends of introduced species and native habitat, possibly in the world, because when this country was settled by Europeans, there was no, agricultural grade pasture. There were no
Mm.
crops, like there were no livestock. And yet, what we view sort of Australian producer culture as today is characterized by growing green grass, pretty looking cows and sheep, and this kind of idyllic man on horseback. Yet none of that was ever here naturally.
Yeah. It's all a very
And
romantic colonial kind of picture, isn't it?
correct.
Mm.
And, the world is in a constant state of change and entropy and succession, and we could go on about that forever. But along the way, we we made some sidesteps. And an example of that is the introduction of deer to
Mm.
Australia. So there used to be a, relatively thriving deer farming industry in Australia. And sometime in the latter half of the 20th century, that market collapsed. It was to do mainly with other proteins becoming a lot more affordable and therefore preferenced. But a lot of deer farmers went bust, and a lot of deer were simply released into the wild.
Mm.
Fast forward 40, 50 years, and we're now looking at a feral deer population in Victoria alone of over 2 million.
Wow.
And deer are not the only issue. Like there are multiple species of deer. It's very hard to estimate accurately population Australia wide, but it's in the millions. But even if you look at another species of wild boar, wild pigs, that population is estimated at more like 12 to 16 million.
Mm.
So we are a net exporter of food in this country already from primary production. We produce far more than we consume domestically. And we haven't even counted the tens of millions of wild animals that are proliferating, that are destroying native habitat, that are competing with natives and farmed species for water, for forage, impacting farmers' daily lives in terms of fencing and infrastructure. We're not even really counting them. And yet we look globally and in other countries we see a crisis of calories.
Mm.
Like so there's this mismatch between this sheer abundance that's available in Australia not being addressed, the immense resource that goes into conventional farming, which we're not saying should necessarily stop, but there should be more of a cognizant balance between the two, a recognition of what we have and a desire to use it.
Yeah. I mean, I keep coming back to a really basic stat, which is 50% average of Australian families skip breakfast, not because they're intermittent fasting, but because of the cost of living. And if there's any meal you can skip or just push on to lunch, have a coffee, and that'll make food cheaper. And yet we have wild protein literally ruining landscapes. So, can we talk about exactly what that destruction is? I know, and I want to mention here as well, Matthew Evans sounded the alarm on this in his meat book, where, you know, often we think, oh, well, I'm just going to be vegetarian and opt out of meat because the whole animal thing, you know, it hurts my heart. It's about killing animals. I can't do that. But there are many farmers of vegetarian eating, vegan eating produce like snow peas and all sorts of things that have to kill hundreds of deer
Yeah,
just to be able to protect their veggies.
correct.
So this is for all eaters
Yeah.
to gather around and talk about without, you know, quite objectively, because
Yes.
it's the entire food system that is
Yes.
being
Yes.
impacted.
I think like, ultimately, one person's individual food choice of what you put on your plate will always be an individual choice.
Mm.
And we're not here to champion, that deer should be on everyone's plate. We're going to force it down your throat. That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
But what we think we can really like hold hands over is being anti-waste.
Mm.
Like we're not anti,
100%. It's the
yeah,
number one food problem in the world. We don't talk about it
correct.
enough. Yeah.
No, we don't. And, to put it in perspective, there, as you're saying, with farmers needing to cull deer to protect their crops, which may then be feeding plant-based eaters. Like similarly, you could be like a vegan ecologist and you'd still be advocating culling.
Mm.
And culling means that the meat gets left to waste. Unfortunately, the provisions in Australia often require that, if there's culling programs happening on public land, like in national parks, that the meat can't be recovered because from a very logical place, they didn't want to have a mandate that said that private enterprises can profit from public land.
Mm.
But
But
what that's ended up doing is wasting a lot of protein.
I was going to say, and now there's this, I think something's being tabled in New South Wales by the Minns government around increasing available permits in national parks to address
Yes.
wild invasive species. Is that actually going ahead? I wonder about the regulation of such a thing where like any
Yeah.
Tom, Dick,
I'm
and
not,
Harry can just jump. I mean, my husband like did courses. He did a whole bunch of things before he
yeah.
went out and helped on a mate's property and
Yeah.
hunted deer, which you know we benefit from, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
As does his friend and the property. But I know not everybody's going to be like my husband and be a real nerd about it, and they're just going to get
Mm,
excited to go out there and shoot
yeah.
stuff and leave it to waste if they don't have those butchery skills and all the things that come after that, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, it's a complex problem.
Mm,
I don't think it's going to be addressed through private recreational hunting. As much as we support that, recreational hunting and the volume of deer taken by recreational hunters, at least the statistics available in Victoria, it is growing every year, which is awesome to see. And that's obviously a byproduct of people being more passionate about sourcing their own food and learning skills. But the scale of the problem is simply too big for
mm,
recreational hunters to make a dent, and it's really up to a commercial industry to scale. And that's kind of a push pull. It's about the government seeing what we're doing and supporting it where they can. But it also is up to the consumer to kind of take a leap of faith and try something new. Like if every Australian ate just a couple 100 grams of wild venison a year, like we'd stabilize the population straight away. Like we
wow.
might not necessarily decrease it, but it would stop growing.
So that goes from the 35 grams currently per capita to
Yeah.
just 200 grams.
More like three to four
Three.
hundred. But
So
look,
two venison steaks a year, let's call it,
yes.
or one
Yeah,
casserole and one steak, you know, just to so that
correct.
we're, you know, nose to tail. But
Yes.
that's not much.
It's not much at all. And the best place for us to look really for the opportunity that we're missing is overseas.
Hmm.
So I'd probably start with New Zealand. So New Zealand had a large invasive species of deer as well back in the 80s. And the government really leaned into that problem and spent a lot of money on sort of capture and usage programs.
Yeah.
And the protein became so prized that a lot of the wild populations ended up becoming farmed. And today, New Zealand supplies 90% of the world's venison. It's
What?
all farmed. It's all
Right.
farmed. And the government has put a huge amount of public money into really marketing the New Zealand brand of venison, which they call Savannah, and promoting it overseas and building export markets. And it's been incredibly successful. They've built a massive industry off it, promoting not just the meat, but also the skins and leathers and, antler and velvet for medicines and collagen for beauty products. And they've created a whole industry essentially from what was originally a small feral population. But our feral population in Australia is double the size of their farmed herd, yet we have no industry.
Wow. And what type of deer? Because I know some of the apprehension is around, oh, is that going to taste really
Hmm.
gamey? I don't like
Sure.
kangaroo much. Can
Yeah,
you talk us through the type of meat you're talking about and where it comes from?
absolutely. So there's a number of species in Australia. They're the most commonly seen around the nation is fallow.
Hmm.
Kind of just visualize Bambi, I suppose,
Oh gosh. Yep.
with
Okay.
spots.
Hmm.
But they're a much smaller species. A carcass weight might be 45 kilos, something you can sling over your shoulder if you're a strong hunter. And because of that body size, that is your more gamey tasting venison.
Got it.
And I think that's what a lot of people have apprehension of before they try game meat, but it's a lot to do with the body size. The species that we focus on at Discovered exclusively is Samba. So
Hmm.
Samba are, colloquially referred to as the king of deer. Like they
Hmm.
were the most prized species to hunt, and they were introduced for that reason. Their carcass size can be upwards of 200 kilos. So
Hmm.
much, much, much closer to cattle than to kangaroo. And it's that high meat to bone ratio that means the flavor is a lot more subtle. It is pretty much unrecognizable in some formats. Like if you were cooking with our mince, or maybe making burgers or sausage, you would be unlikely to recognize that it's not just beef or veal, but it's very nuanced. Like it's a light touch game, and it's why we decided to focus on it because we viewed one of the biggest barriers as being taste. Like if you can meet people at taste and price, then the story, as much as we love it and as much as we believe in it, almost doesn't matter because
Mm.
it's delicious and affordable.
Well, especially in the current economic climate, like people are literally deciding whether they put a punnet of blueberries. I mean, blueberries is probably a really bad example because of all the toxicity reports coming out, but
Mm,
like spring onions, let's say, should I? No, that's a bit of a nice to have. I'll skip that. I'll skip. And
yeah,
people are really being very discerning. So price really
yeah.
does matter right now as a central reason for people choosing something or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if we can scale to have a meaningful impact on this problem, and the majority of our customers don't care about emissions or native habitat or anything, then it doesn't really matter because we've still achieved the mission of giving people what we really believe is the most nutrient dense meat on the
Mm.
planet at a good price.
Yeah, amazing. And can we unpack a little bit further then the native habitat destruction and the carbon emissions? Because I think those are two really
Mhm.
interesting things for
Yeah,
people to really understand the why of like, okay, I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna get a box. This is by
yeah.
no means an ad. You guys know I don't do ads as shows, but I think, yeah, let's just keep breaking down all those barriers and give people more and more reason to up there at least once a year, right?
Yeah, for sure.
This show is possible every week thanks to our podcast partners and you, our listeners. And I want to introduce the Aussies who are listening to the Marker Sun Care product. It's the Bambino Kids sunscreen, SPF 50, a huge 25% zinc oxide, which makes it extremely protective against both UVA and UVB rays. And it's reef safe, no nanoparticles, none of those dodgy, harsh preservatives that we see see in the media time and again with mainstream sunscreens coming under fire. And you have 20% off for the month of August with the code LowToxLife. So I would definitely urge you to give this one a try, and Marca Sun Care literally has you covered. Yes, I went there.
So when it comes to native habitat, there's a couple elements. Firstly, as I think any Australian will know, we don't have large predators in this
Mm,
country. Like, as much as I hope the Tassie tiger is still out there somewhere, in reality, we've got foxes and we've got kind of smaller predators, but there's nothing that's going to be big enough to take down a wild deer other than another invasive species, which is wild dogs. So they really absolutely thrive in our environment. They move really quickly and they can strip back a lot of understory growth. They use their antlers and ring bark trees, and they can just move through areas a lot faster than like our other sort of ruminant grazers or kangaroos, macropods. So they're really just out competing native species for forage and for water.
hmm
But then they also love that intersection between agricultural land and bushland. So they're pushing into farmers' properties and then competing for those resources, being super lush grass that's meant to be
mm,
for cattle or lamb, and water sources. So when you play that through into a carbon footprint, like all a carbon footprint really is how much did you use to make this? And what was used in growing a deer was native habitat and agricultural resources that someone else has already invested in. So compared to growing a cow, like on an ecological basis, the inputs are basically zero because removing that animal from the environment is a net positive.
mm.
So the only thing that gets counted into the carbon footprint of a wild harvested species, whether it's deer, kangaroo, boar, is the fuel used by our harvesters to go out in the field, the utilities that we use at our butchery facility, vacuum bags, things like that. But none of the vast amounts of water, land, antibiotics, hormones, feed, fertilizer, transport that goes into most farmed proteins is counted. And that's why we have 24 times less emissions than beef, 3 times less emissions than even, a plant-based burger.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's that's pretty astounding, and the benefit that you get from removing them from the environment then impacts the positivity of other forms of farming as well. Like it makes them
Yeah,
less harmful because the resources aren't being stolen to need more resources
yeah,
than you should need.
yeah. It's a really beautiful business model
Mm,
because, and it's why we've all continued to push the mission and stayed involved despite some really challenging times, because we've never encountered an idea like this that is just fundamentally positive in every single direction.
mm.
If you care about nutrition, you're not going to get more nutrient dense than this. If you care about native habitat, you're never going to have a bigger impact on conservation just by eating something. If you care about farmers, you're never going to save them money by doing something else. We create regional jobs. Like, it just is fundamentally a positive model.
Wow. And how many people are working in the business now?
So we're now up to about 12 people between
Wow.
our butchers and staff and pie makers and whatnot, but that doesn't count the network of harvesters.
hmm
So there's over 100 properties, shooters and landholders in the network,
hmm
covering like 30,000 hectares of private property. And we don't have a problem with supply. We just have to tackle the demand end to continue to grow it and make an impact.
And where are the hurdles there right now? Like, is it really
Yeah.
just communicating and getting people to feel confident enough to say, yes, that I'm going to try that? Is it that
Yeah,
simple?
I think there's two elements to it. One of them is the education. That will remain a challenge, I think, for a while. Like when you look overseas to the US or Europe, they have a long culture of eating wild protein.
I was going to
in
say, like, there are plenty of people listening right now from the US and Europe going, why do you guys have a problem getting
I
people
know.
to eat venison? That's weird.
Yeah, like if we explained it to any, like my husband's from the States, and when we talk about this, everyone's just shocked, like they think it's a fake stat. But we don't have, for some reason, even though we were settled by Europeans, like we lost touch with that culture. And while it's really encouraging to see hunting culture growing in Australia, there will always be quite a large gap for us to educate around why it's ethical, for one,
Mm,
and why it's good for you and how you cook with it and why it tastes great. So, education for sure. But the other main barrier is distribution.
mm.
So, we're a really big country for how many
Yeah.
people live here. And what's involved in harvesting an animal overnight under very strict protocols, getting it to a processing facility or a chiller box before sunrise and keeping the body at temperature the whole time while maintaining compliance with, checking for any kind of parasite or illness or, contamination, then processing it, then getting it to, further processing, packing out, shipping it cold chain all up and down the East Coast, let alone potentially to the West Coast. It's a really expensive, logistics heavy exercise
And
and
can,
difficult to compete at a small scale.
yeah, and can I ask, Tara, is the work that Tammy Jonas is doing on policy and micro abattoirs something that would be hugely beneficial to businesses like yours, where there was better access to more options to get that produce there to butcher?
Yeah, I think that it will help businesses like ours who are in a different stage, but we're now sort of 3 or 4 years in. We have two fully scaled game processing sites,
Okay, right.
and processing is not really our bottleneck. It's more the chicken and egg of distribution and demand.
Mm,
So, like I said, we're a huge country, so logistics are expensive, and when you're dealing with fresh produce, especially meat, but it applies as much to fruit and veg. The moment we harvest a deer, the clock is ticking,
hmm
right? Because most people want to buy their fresh produce fresh.
mm,
They want to buy it chilled. And the clock is ticking from the moment we harvest on the shelf life of that product. And until there's large amounts of demand, you are basically harvesting, freezing off, and then hoping that you can trade the
mm,
product. And our business ebbs and flows as to when there's huge demand or not. It can be seasonal. But in terms of the gap from what we do at the moment to being, in the cold section at Woolworths, there's a lot that needs to happen
mm,
because a chain like that, which is really, they hold the keys to true scale. They want you to be scaled already. And
mm,
even if you kind of take a few steps back and you go, all right, let's just talk about IGAs and independent grocers, everyone kind of wants you to already have built the system, the protocols, the quality assurance and the scale and the price that comes with scale before they'll then take you on. So investing ahead of the curve is a huge part of getting into fast moving consumer products. And it's really the biggest step change challenge that we've faced. But um, we're kind of doing what we can to work our way around it. So just this week we've launched a whole new online butcher shop where we can ship all the way up and down the East Coast direct to consumer
yeah, I was going to
with
say
a
that
much wider
that
range.
is a really
Yeah.
great way to start. God, the amount of puns you use that you don't even
There's a lot
realize
of puns.
that
Yeah.
beefing up the the volume to
Yeah.
then give you the confidence to pitch to the bigger
Yeah.
logistics chains. Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's the phase we're in now. We finally developed, I think, products that are right for the market, like products that really make it easy for your everyday chef who's never cooked with venison to say, like, I'm going to give this a go. Focusing on mince, burgers, sausage, but also bone broths, pies, ready-made meals, things that are just an instant no-brainer for people to work with. Because previously you would have had to order 10 kilos
Mm,
of meat from us of all different cuts. And I think it was just too overwhelming.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, for the average city living freezer, you don't even have the space to store that. Works regionally, where most people have
Mm,
chest freezers and things, a different kind of style of living. But so then, in terms of getting to this 300 grams a year per person, that would probably mean it'd be a small group of passionate people, probably introducing a couple of kilos a year into their mix of meals. What are some of your favorite ways to enjoy venison?
oh, there's so many. I mean, I'm one of those people doing the hard yards and trying to eat, 20 or 30 kilos of deer a year
Yep.
to
Okay.
make up for the low consumption people. Um, Look, I've got small child, so accessible food matters, fast food but nutritious matters. We do a lot of stir fries,
Mm.
whether it's using rump into strips or tenderloin into strips or just the mince. I also just love, I mean, like one, it's easy for me, but my daughter just absolutely loves anything that involves pasta. So lasagna, ragouts, meatballs. It's really just another red meat, like we're saying.
Yeah.
Anything you could expect to use beef or lamb for in a given week at home, you can see yourself doing exactly the same thing with venison.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've found. If anything, like in the slow cooking, I've found sometimes it takes an extra hour maybe to
Yeah.
really make it pull a party.
Yes.
But that's really the only difference I've noticed in cooking with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. And my son taught me the tip of the little quarter teaspoon of bicarb mixed
Yeah.
through the strips before you make a stir fry because he's an
Yeah.
Asian cooking freak and
Yeah.
knows so many tricks. And I tried it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so like just melted in your mouth. And
Mhm.
I just don't think there's any barriers now. And it's just like anything new. You think, oh, okay. And you taste something, you think, oh my God, that's delicious. Like, why did I have such
Yeah,
a hang
a
up or
presumption.
a
Mm,
presumption that it was going to be difficult? Can I ask about invasive species in the world? Because there's probably going to be some examples where triumph has actually happened, and
for
we
sure.
can look to what's possible to motivate us to
Yeah.
actually tackle this here. I founded Low Tox Life in 2009, and as the community grew, I started to identify areas that people needed structured learning. And that is when the first e-course, Go Low Tox, was born in 2014. Since then, I've worked with scientists and health professionals to bring you low cost courses to help you shortcut your goals with whatever you're challenged by right now. So, whether you're new to going low tox and you'd love a framework and some really helpful suggestions across 22 different topics covering everyday life, or maybe you're working on an inflammation picture and you just want some help to calm the farm, whether you're on a fertility journey, either having trouble or wanting to optimize, we literally have courses for these and more. Head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the course tab, and enjoy.
Yeah. So our dream scenario, I suppose, that we have as a business would be to reach the point that another company we followed for a long time out of Hawaii has reached. So they're called Maui Nui Venison, and they're on the island of Maui. And it's taken them around 15 years to get to where they are today. So I do try to remind myself of that. Um, but in short, Maui has an invasive species of axis deer or an overpopulated species. And while that species is of value to the local population they do hunt, similar to Australia, it was just becoming completely unbalanced. And this company started because the founder, Jake Muse, who was a hunter himself, really invested in hunting and the scale of the problem and addressing it, set a goal to scale consumption of it beyond the island to the point that they brought the population into balance and could basically use it as a economic resource, and manage it. The level of technology that they now work with using like radar and mapping populations is insane. Like they use thermal imagery to literally map and estimate populations across the entire island. They can define species from incredible distances. And fast forward, sort of 10, 15 years, they've actually achieved their mission. So they started as mainly just hunting and selling the meat to pet food.
Mm-hmm.
But once they got FDA approval, which is much more challenging actually in their context than what we have to do in Australia,
Mm.
they expanded into shipping all across the states. And back to that point about how the US especially values wild protein and wild venison so much more highly than we do. Like the prices that they charge per kilo for the same products as us are 4 to 5 times higher.
Wow.
Like it's exceptional.
Mm.
So they started a direct to consumer proposition selling off their website, and it was a subscriber model. So that's something we're pushing for as well. But essentially, the subscriber model gave them visibility of what was needed to be harvested, so there would be no waste. And that subscriber model has now scaled up so much that they can't let more people in until someone cancels their subscription. So
Wow.
it's a membership-based program, direct to consumer, online, that has single-handedly brought an entire species imbalance back into balance while creating local jobs. And at the same time, they keep aside a portion of their harvest specifically for really accessible, low cost, or free protein for locals on the island. So it's a super holistic business model. If
Oh, I
people are
love that
interested,
aspect because often
yeah,
what happens is trend happens, demand happens, and the local people pay the price.
yeah,
We saw
yeah,
that with quinoa, I think in Ecuador, no,
mm,
Bolivia, and
mm,
and a couple of other examples in the world where trend happens and local people end up with
yeah,
less access to their local wild
yeah.
foods. Yeah.
No, it's really beautiful. And
Mm.
people, if people are interested, they should definitely look up Maui Nui Venison. And there's quite a few podcasts out there with Jake, the founder, telling his story a lot more eloquently than I can do it secondhand. But to put it in perspective, like they did that with a population of 60,000 deer. We're
Hmm.
looking at millions. So
Yeah.
the scale of the problem we have to address is far larger. But if you want to be more of an optimist, that means the scale of the problem is also the same scale we have to share nutrition with people,
Mm.
because the nutritional proposition is just hard to beat.
100%. And so you mentioned technology and the radars that they're able to work with. And I'm constantly thinking, like, someone's listening to this and thinking, yeah, but what can I do? Like, yes, we can eat. Like, we can always eat,
Hmm.
and that's a very powerful thing. But is it worth us writing to our local politician and saying, hey, I've just been made aware of this invasive species problem and the scale of destruction that it's causing?
Yeah,
There's a local company doing this amazing work, and they're inspired by this company in Hawaii. And I think if they had
yeah,
access to the technology, like, could we
yeah,
draft a kind of letter that we all send to our MPs and say, this is literally ruining farmers' lives, our native wildlife,
yeah. I
and
love it. I love it.
leaving wild food out there, not on the table, so to speak.
I love it. Get it on
Mm.
the table. Look, being like an active citizen is
Mm.
not something I would ever say is a bad idea,
No,
right?
totally. And I think a combination of things. I think the proliferation of information and social media, where we are consuming more than we create now in terms of knowledge versus action. But also, COVID kind of threw us for six on everything. It was just so exhausting. Whatever side you fell on, we can
Mm,
all unite over the fact that it was highly disruptive to our way of life.
hmm.
And I feel like there are muscles we forgot we had that we need to start using again. And so
Hmm.
I always try to make a part of the show, especially when we're talking food system change, like, okay, so
Hmm.
what is the thing? What's the thing we can all think about doing? So
Hmm.
maybe you and I could draft a little letter,
I'd love that.
don't you think? And then
Yeah.
anyone listening today who's Australia based, or if you know there's an invasive species problem where you live in the world, like let's actually all do that local government reach out where we do have power of voice, not straight to the top where we very rarely have power of voice, and get these
I
things
love that.
talked about more.
Yeah, I love that. And as an aside, whether you're Australia based or not, the best thing you can do is have a conversation about it and just
Mm.
spread awareness because I can't, I still can't count, even after running this business for sort of 4 years now, how many people I meet where I tell them the number, 2 million feral deer in Victoria, and they're just like, what? We have deer in Australia? Like,
Yeah,
so,
right.
so the awareness helps. Having conversations helps. Sharing this podcast helps.
Mm. And having people over for dinner for a delicious slow cooked venison casserole.
Yeah.
That helps too.
Yeah.
Because there's
Yeah.
nothing that convinces people something's worth having than a shared meal of something delicious. You know, I always say
Absolutely.
to our families who have allergies like gluten free or dairy free and they're worried socially, I always say, don't announce that the brownies you have brought to the barbecue are gluten free or dairy free or anything free. Just say,
Just
hey,
serve
you
it.
want a brownie? And people, oh my God, that's delicious. Can I have the recipe? And that starts the conversation. I don't think it's any
Yeah.
different here.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think when we first started, we were so passionate about the why that we spent too much time trying to explain why someone should eat it before they'd even tasted it, especially when we did events or pop-ups or tastings. And a lot of the time now we just serve it up.
Mm.
And, we've done market stalls where we kind of play down, the menu, or we'll say it's a
Yeah.
wild burger, and people think it's just the name of the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
How
there's
funky.
nothing more powerful. There's nothing more powerful than people just using their taste buds,
Yeah.
right? Because if you come to someone with a really loaded sales pitch and a story and conservation and statistics and all of this, I guess, baggage before they've even tried it, they already kind of form an idea in their mind as to why they should eat it versus just following their taste buds.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm reminded of that marketing principle of Seth Godin, which is people like us do things like this. And
Yep.
there's this many people, and if you're listening, not watching, I'm just pinching my fingers together with the smallest gap that actually care about conservation. Unfortunately, that is just the way it is. But there's
Mm.
this many people, tons and tons, who care about eating something yummy. And so
Yeah.
let's play that game to
Yeah.
go, hey, and
Yeah.
create the connection. Then you might actually get more people interested in conservation.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, I
Mm.
think 98% of people care about taste.
Yeah.
The 2% are those strange people you meet sometimes who, if they didn't have to eat to survive, they'd probably just opt out.
I've never understood those people. No.
But 98% of people really care about taste. They care about flavor. They care about enjoyment. And at least I would hope, 60 to 70% of people these days, we've definitely got work to do, but 60 to 70% of people these days care about health.
Mm.
And, we don't have a crisis of calories in Australia. Calories are abundant and they're cheap, they're everywhere. But we do have somewhat of a crisis of nutrition.
Yeah.
And there's not that much clarity for people around what is actually good for you sometimes in a supermarket. There's stickers and labels and packages and marketing, but if you bring it back to just whole foods,
Mm.
this is one of the most nutrient dense whole foods you could ever ask for.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's so well known in French and Swiss cultures, Italian, in the mountains. You need your sustenance. And so you have your big bowl of venison stew. Like it's just part of the culture. And you
Yeah.
know that that's the meat you choose if someone's under the weather or feeling weak constitutionally, was the
Yeah.
historical description. So it's really just about, yeah, getting it in on people's tables. I think, and it speaks for itself. But the opportunity from a food policy perspective, governmentally, to provide cheap protein by subsidizing something that actually
Yeah,
needs subsidizing versus
correct.
another big monocrop, and fixes a massive environmental problem
Yeah,
is just
I
such a
fully agree.
no-brainer. Yeah.
Like
So
even
let's.
even if you are not a meat eater, like we have the opportunity for Australia to become one of the world's top suppliers and exporters of nutrient-dense protein.
Mm,
No one can offer what's on offer here, like tens of millions of basically livestock, but wild livestock. Like that's an abundant resource no other country in the world can claim.
yeah. All right. Well, we're going to be drafting a letter. We're going to be putting that for you guys to download on the show notes and YouTube. Tara, anything else you want to share? I think it's always so inspiring to hear about real impacts we can have from our plates like this.
Nothing. Just people should have conversations, and that
Mm,
conversation is really just about the fact that nature doesn't waste, so neither
mm,
should we.
love it. Thanks so much for joining me again. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us in listening to this week's show. If you're not already subscribed or following the show on whatever platform you listened, please do that now. It helps enormously in terms of getting this show out to more people. Another way you can connect and support the work we do so that we can support you in your low tox life is join us in the Low Tox Club. You'll get access to amazing member masterclasses where we invite some of our best show guests for a live Q&A with members. You also have great shopping discounts from low tox businesses and honestly, the nicest low tox community Facebook group that exists on the internet. I do hope you join us there. It costs just the price of a coffee a month on average. Head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the Explore tab, and Low Tox Club is the first option there. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.